Thanks for following Knockout Crypto. You can find our channel on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. Twitter will have our most up-to-date information. Instagram will have our up-to-date information as well. YouTube, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment as well. I want to bring this article to you guys. I think I just thought it was just a great article with great information. And I thought that the guy who wrote the article, James Martin Duffy, he's the co-founder and one of the founders of Loom Network, which is a layer 2 platform on top of Ethereum. But I just want to give him a shout out and say to him, James Martin Duffy, this is a great article. Thank you for writing this and sharing this. And I think a lot of people, I think this should be required reading for anyone that's into blockchain right now, because if you read this article, you understand a lot more of what's going on in the blockchain world and where Ethereum will be the backbone of the new internet. So let me just read this to you again. Ethereum will be the backbone of the new internet. The Loom network is building on layer 2 on top of the Ethereum network instead of other blockchain platforms, and here's why. Ethereum will be the backbone of the new internet. So let's see this article and what it's about. Each month, another company publishes a white paper claiming to have solved the scalability problems faced by Ethereum. These new blockchains claim to be better, faster, and smarter than Ethereum. They say they can handle thousands, even millions of transactions per second, and have no transaction fees and have near instant confirmation times. Yet at Loom Network, when we set out to build a platform for bringing large-scale decentralized mobile games and social networks to the mainstream, Ethereum was by far the most obvious choice to build on top of. In this article, I'll explain the reasons why we think Ethereum has already won the race to become the foundation of Web 3.0 and will become the fundamental base layer that all major DApp platforms will choose to build on top of in the future. Let's start with the most obvious. Let me read that again. In this article, I'll explain the reasons why we think Ethereum has already won the race to become the foundation of Web 3.0 and will become the fundamental base layer that all major DApp platforms will choose to build on top of in the future. Let's start with the most obvious. Ethereum has an order of magnitude more developers building on it than any other platform, and this gap is widening by the day. Our Ethereum code school, Crypto Zombies, has now over 207,623 users since we launched in last November. And this number has been growing constantly by over 30,000 users per month, with no signs of slowing down. Truffle, a development framework for Ethereum, has had almost 550,000 downloads, growing at over 45,000 users per month since January. Simply put, the number of developers building on top of Ethereum is not only growing, it's accelerating. Downloads over the lifetime of Truffle from inception to now. Lifetime downloads over 550,000. Who knows where that number is at now? That means if another blockchain platform wants to beat Ethereum in terms of developer adoption, it's not enough for it to catch up to where Ethereum is now. It has to exceed Ethereum's growth rate moving forward. Why is developer adoption important? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many transactions per second your blockchain can handle if no one is actually using it. Let me read that again, because a lot of times people get so caught up on this transactions per second thing, which has so many different variables. It doesn't matter how many transactions per second your blockchain can handle if no one is actually using it, right? And in order to have applications worth using, you need to attract developers to build them. If you don't have developers building applications on your blockchain, you are effectively building a ghost town. Listen to Steve Ballmer explain this. I'm not sure what caused Steve Ballmer to go nuts on stage at this conference and create this classic moment in meme history, but I'm including him here to emphasize my point. Developer adoption is everything. I'm going to read that again. Developer adoption is everything. The blockchain platform that has the most developers building real-world applications on top of it will be the platform that gains the widest mainstream adoption. And not only does Ethereum have a massive head start in this area, but the gap is widening with each day that passes. And why is Ethereum attracting the most developers? Ethereum has better tools and infrastructure for DApp development than any other platform. You have Truffle, Inferior, Web3.js, Opus Zeppelin, Guess, Gotcha, MetaMask, Crypto Zombies, MyCrypto, EtherScan, ERC20, ERC721. These are tools, among many others, that different developer teams have tirelessly poured hundreds of thousands of hours into, and they're free to use for any Ethereum developer who wants to build a DApp on Ethereum. And this developer ecosystem is only growing as time goes on. Our team and at least a dozen others are in the process of building even more tools and infrastructure around Ethereum DApp development that will make Ethereum developers' lives easier in the future. It's Metcalfe's law applied to developer infrastructure. The more developers building useful stuff, the easier and more enjoyable it becomes for new developers to build, and the effect compounds on itself. If you're a developer and you wanted to build a blockchain platform that replaces Ethereum, you would need to build equivalent versions of all of these tools on top of your own platform in order to compete with Ethereum ease of use for developers. We'll read that again. So if you're a new developer and you want to build a blockchain platform that replaces Ethereum, you would need to build an equivalent version of all of the tools on top of your own platform in order to compete with Ethereum's ease of use for developers. Or you could just build on top of Ethereum and take advantage of all of these things out the box. But let's go one level deeper. Let's talk about why developers would want to spend their time building these tools, and here's where we really go deep down the rabbit hole and we see where Ethereum really shines. Still with me? You guys still there? We haven't gotten to the core of the argument yet. We're just getting started. Ethereum does not sacrifice decentralization. When it comes to blockchains, there's a fundamental law called the scalability trilemma. It's kind of like a law of physics that states a blockchain can only have two of these three properties: decentralization, scalability, and security. What that means is, given the same level of security, if you want to increase a blockchain scalability, you must sacrifice its decentralization. Why is this true? Due to the nature of blockchains, every single validator needs to run every single computation that occurs on the network to ensure its accuracy. So if you want the network to be sufficiently decentralized by having thousands of users running validations, the max number of transactions per second need to be capped by what the average user's PC and network speed can handle. On the other hand, if you ever wanted to have the fastest, most scalable blockchain ever, you should do the following. Require that all validators be supercomputers, have as few validators as possible on the network to decrease the number of connections per node, put all of the validators in the same geographical area, country data center, to decrease latency between nodes. Can you see why that would be a really bad idea for a blockchain? And yet every project I've seen that boasts a very high number of transactions per second is quietly making this decentralization trade-off. Most of them are just not transparent about it to their users and investors. So why does decentralization matter? There's an excellent pair of blog posts from Chris Dixon and Spencer Bogart with the same title, Why Decentralization Matters, both highly recommended reads. In his article, Chris Dixon makes a simple argument. Developers are a lot more incentivized to build on a platform they know is not going to change the rules or that later down the line, taking away their audience and profits. If you build an application on Facebook or Apple App Store, you have to trust that these platforms aren't going to ban you in the future, block certain users from using your app, or seeing your updates, or start charging you higher fees to keep accessing the same audience. Ethereum, on the other hand, is what we call permissionless. Ethereum can be used by anyone for any purpose without needing permission from anyone. No one can stop you from uploading a piece of code into the Ethereum blockchain, and no one can stop your users from executing it. That's powerful. Let that sink in for a moment because it's extremely powerful. I'm going to read that again. Ethereum can be used by anyone for any purpose without needing permission from anyone. No one can stop you from uploading a piece of code into the Ethereum blockchain, and no one can stop your users from executing it. Let that sink in for a minute because it's extremely powerful. For the first time in history, we have a platform that no one can shut down and no one can censor. Not governments, not mega corporations with tons of money, not the Rothschilds, the Bowengaffs, the reptilians, or whatever conspiracy theory you subscribe to. If you build a DApp on Ethereum, no one can stop your users from anonymously accessing it. If you buy some tokens or digital items that are stored on the network, you are guaranteed that they will stay there forever and no one will be able to take them away from you. And it's these permissionless and censorship-resistant properties of the decentralized blockchains that have enabled us for the first time in internet history the true ownership of digital items. Listen to this, guys. For the first time in internet history, we now have true ownership of digital items. That is a key point, and that is what blockchains are all about. Okay? So, yeah, I'm talking about Ready Player One with true ownership of digital items that cannot be taken away from you. Blockchain enables us to do crazy things in online games and virtual realities, like having virtual avatars that aren't owned by any company and can persist between worlds. More centralized platforms don't have this guarantee. Pretty much every platform that has been touted as the Ethereum killer has simply decided to trade off decentralization in favor of higher scalability and advertise it as if it's a feature. And this trade-off is tempting to make because it seems it's what the market wants. Users who don't know better complain about the high fees and slow transaction times, but we can't really blame developers for trying to give the market what it thinks it wants. In Spencer Bogart's Why Decentralization Matters, he says, it's not surprising that the new users and developers have gravitated toward these newer networks. Improved throughput and functionality are things that users and developers can immediately appreciate, whereas the benefits of decentralization as a feature are seemingly amorphous. So in the short term, users may be tempted by the performance offered by more scalable blockchains, not realizing the importance of decentralization until a wake-up call brings everything crashing down. He continues, the reality, however, is that without decentralization, these crypto networks lose their most important qualities of being permissionless and censorship resistant. That is, anyone can use the network and anyone can build on top of them. After all, the entire point of a decentralized blockchain is to provide a hard promise and immutable ledger with an open, non-discriminatory participation. In a sense, we bear the inefficiency of decentralization because it's the only way to enable a network with these qualities. Other blockchains that achieve 1,000 TPS or higher do so by having a small fixed number of nodes that validate all the transactions, 21 in EOS and 101 in the case of lists. But a network run by 21 nodes requires that you trust these 21 publicly identifiable nodes to not make changes to the protocol or restrict certain people from using it for certain purposes in the future. It's a lot harder for a malicious entity to influence thousands of anonymous Ethereum nodes to censor certain transactions than it would be for them to gain influence over 15 out of 21 publicly known block producers, or for those 15 block producers to form a cartel and change the rules in ways that profit them, like what happens on centralized platforms, or for a government or corporation to put pressure on these entities to censor certain transactions or users. As Spencer puts it, these semi-decentralized platforms are subject to the same social and economic pressures that motivate centralized platforms to censor certain users and activities, and therefore will trend toward the same outcome they're supposed to correct. If developers can't 100% trust that the base layer will always remain permissionless and censorship resistant, then there will be very little incentive for them to start building on the platform versus simply using a traditional web server. By sacrificing base layer decentralization and the nearsighted goal of attracting users by increasing throughput, these platforms have ironically undermined the entire motivation for using a blockchain in the first place. And on top of that, increasing throughput on layer 1 isn't even a scalable approach. It will get you some initial gains, but is fundamentally bottlenecked by the nature of blockchains and not the way to achieve true scalability. Which brings me to my next point. It will be impossible to run all of the world's decentralized applications on a single blockchain. Scaling has to occur on layer 2. It would be absurd to try to run the internet's 100 most popular games and social apps all on one giant supercomputer. Likewise, it's absurd to assume that the world's decentralized applications in the foreseeable future will run on one blockchain. That's just not going to happen. Facebook alone needs hundreds of thousands of servers to function. Yet some people think a decentralized Facebook would share one massive blockchain with every other app in existence. No. Let's look at some quick numbers. Facebook experiences 30,000 likes, comments per second. The NASDAQ sees 20,000 trades per second. And MMO games like PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds handle over 1 million concurrent users updating game state. It would only take a few dozen apps and games of this size before you're exceeding 1 million TPS in aggregate. And then what do you do when the number of users doubles? Clearly, trying to run every single DApp on the same chain is not a practical approach. It doesn't matter if a blockchain can do 1,000 transactions per second or 1,000,000 transactions per second. No single blockchain will be fast enough to handle all of the world's decentralized applications on the same chain. Scaling has to occur on layer 2. The solution is obvious. These applications will need to be split up across multiple blockchains. We realized this early on at Loom when we presented the idea of application-specific sidechains. We foresaw that eventually some decentralized applications would grow popular enough to reach even 1/10 of Facebook's scale, and the only possible way to run them would be their own dedicated chains. Of course, if you put these deep dApps that require thousands of transactions per second on their own standalone blockchains, they'll be vulnerable to the same issues that we discussed above and why decentralization matters. But if you put them on a side chain to a blockchain that is sufficiently decentralized, like Ethereum, you get the best of both worlds. Side chains provide higher scalability without sacrificing security. A sidechain can use a different consensus algorithm like DPoS, optimized for dApps that require very high TPS or low latency, while storing any tokens or data requiring a high level of security on the main chain. This way, even though the sidechain is less decentralized than the main chain, the amount of trust required by users is minimized since they have the option to move anything of real value to the main chain for safekeeping. Even more so if you secure the layer 2 assets with Plasma Cash. By putting your dApp on a sidechain to a decentralized mainnet, you get all of the benefits of higher scalability offered by a faster blockchain while maintaining the same trust and security guarantees provided by the decentralized base layer. Spencer in his article arrives at the same conclusion we came to. The path forward, highly decentralized base layer with increased centralization and efficiency on the higher layers. And in fact, this seems to be the same model envisioned by Vitalik Buterin himself. You could run StarCraft on the blockchain. Those kinds of things are possible. High level of security and scalability allows all these various other things to be built on top. Ethereum is a secure base layer that doesn't have too many features. Ethereum provides a secure base layer for layer 2 solutions to build on top of. Now that we understand that, scaling needs to happen on layer 2. The most important property of layer 1 is decentralization. So the real question is, if not Ethereum, what base layer would you build your layer 2 on top of? We've already seen that very few chains do decentralization well as Ethereum does. According to a recent consensus report, there are just under 17,000 nodes running the Ethereum blockchain across 6 continents, making it the most decentralized blockchain platform in existence. And any additional features another blockchain might offer, such as higher throughput, gasless transactions, low latency transactions, can simply be implemented as layer 2 services on Ethereum. In fact, those features are exactly what we're building at Loom Network with Zombie Chain, a layer 2 gas-free, low latency DPoS sidechain to Ethereum. And that is just one of many layer 2 scaling solutions under development. It's hard to fathom why a developer would want to replace Ethereum instead of just simply building on top of it. And knowing the obvious motivation that doing so allows them to raise hundreds of millions of dollars in an ICO. Our plan is to invest your money back into blockchain technology. It's like Ethereum, but better. Yeah, right. It's kind of like reinventing the wheel. Sure, you might be able to build a slightly better base layer that still provides sufficient decentralization and throws in some additional features, but then you somehow need to convince all the developers to jump ship to use an untested platform, and in the meantime, Ethereum developers could take whatever good ideas you've had and implement them on a layer 2 chain on top of Ethereum. It's also extremely risky. If a layer 2 platform gets hacked or exploited, users' loss is minimized because the majority of the tokens and data of value is still safely stored on the layer 1 Ethereum. But if you build a new layer 1 blockchain that stores tokens that users pay real money for, and the odds that your code will be exploit free out the gate are slim, and in the case of an exploit, your users potentially have billions of dollars at stake. In programming circles, there's a rule that states don't roll your own crypto. I'm going to go ahead and predict that after we see the first major blockchain exploit in which millions or billions of dollars in token value evaporates into thin air, we'll start to hear a similar refrain among blockchain engineers. Don't roll your own layer 1, which brings me to my final point. New platforms are unproven, while Ethereum security has already stood the test of time. At the time of this writing, there is 61 billion in circulating ETH. That's a lot of financial incentive for someone to try to hack and exploit the network. And yet, to this day, almost 3 years after the Ethereum mainnet launch, no one has managed to find an exploit in the platform security. Exploits have been found in individual smart contracts that developers have deployed to Ethereum, but I'm talking about the core platform itself. The more that time passes without an exploit being found, despite a lot of people trying, the higher the likelihood that the platform is secure and won't ever be exploited in the future. This is similar to what Nassim Taleb called the Lindy effect. The Lindy effect is a concept that the future life expectancy of some non-perishable things like a technology or an idea is proportional to their current age, so that every additional period of survival implies a longer remaining life expectancy. Basically, when a new blockchain platform springs up, developers will be reluctant to use it because it hasn't stood the test of time. What if it's exploitable? What if it's not truly decentralized? Why should I invest all my time building my DApp on top of it when I'm not sure it would be around 2 years from now? The longer the chain survives without suffering a major exploit, the more trustworthy and legitimate it becomes in developers' eyes. Yet again, Ethereum has a massive head start here. For a new blockchain platform that launches today, it will take a few years before it has survived long enough for developers to view it as trustworthy. But in that same time, Ethereum will continue to race ahead in terms of developer adoption and support and infrastructure, not to mention real-life dApps and end users. Because Ethereum has such a long head start on all other smart contract platforms, it will always appear to be the better option from a security standpoint compared to a younger blockchain. Especially, as we mentioned before, any new feature a new smart contract platform adds that might tempt developers away can simply be built on layer 2 and still keep the security promises of Ethereum. Conclusion: Ethereum isn't perfect, but at this point, it's hard to imagine it being displaced as the de facto layer 1 for decentralized applications. JavaScript isn't a perfect programming language, and for the longest time it was plagued with some pretty serious problems, but that didn't stop it from becoming the de facto programming language of Web 2.0. I predict we've already reached the tipping point where we'll see the same thing happen with Ethereum for Web 3.0. For all its flaws and shortcomings, it also has some of the smartest minds in the industry working on solving them and building tools and infrastructure to make them less of a hindrance. And thus we come full circle to my developer's argument. Go ahead, you can watch that Steve Ballmer clip again. I won't tell anyone. It's possible that in the future, another project will spring up that offers some significant advantages over Ethereum and manage to get all the Ethereum developers to jump ship. But I wouldn't bet my ERC20s on it. The Loom Network is a platform for building highly scalable DPoS sidechains to Ethereum with a focus on large-scale games and social apps. Let's go right back to that. I love that Steve Ballmer clip, and this is what you guys have got to get through your head. Developer adoption is the key, and right now Ethereum is killing all other chains in developer adoption. Let's go back to this clip, okay? Ethereum has 30 more times developers than the next blockchain community. Okay, I'm going to get that article in the next video, you guys. But let me know what you think about this article, guys. I thought it was just a great article. I think it should be required reading for anyone that's studying blockchains. I think James Martin Duffy, I want to thank him again. This was just a great article. I think he's definitely one of the best minds in crypto. Thank you for writing this article, James. We really appreciate it. Shout out to you. And we'll definitely be checking out the Loom Network. But thank you for this article. You guys, let me know what you think about the article in the comments below. Thank you for following Knockout Crypto. Like the video, comment on the video, subscribe to the channel. Appreciate your support.